we're here actually at the Ponca Elk Education Center, which I'm just now remembering is a different name now. I think you guys have changed the name.
Yeah, it is the Ponca Nature Center.
Okay, gotcha. And that's because we were joined by our guest for the episode. That's Wes Wright. Wes is the elk program coordinator or state elk biologist, if you will, kind of interchangeable. And we're here to hang with you. We're here to learn about what you do and learn about the elk in Arkansas and the story of the elk and how they were reintroduced and just hear the whole gambit. So, Wes, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all coming. And like I said, y'all saw some elk earlier this evening.
Yeah, we did.
So our elk viewing area is just right down the road here. And so this is a pretty cool place, Ponca. And we have a lot of people that come here each year to view the elk and to come to this nature center. So again, I appreciate y'all coming up and sharing the evening with me.
Absolutely. And on that, just real quick, the Ponca Nature Center. So what is it and what kind of events and services do you guys offer to the public? Because I know it's open to everybody, anybody who wants to come.
Yeah, so we're open 5 days a week here, and it's a real popular place, for people that are viewing the elk to come in. We have a board on the wall where we kind of keep up with where the elk groups are, and so we can point people in the right direction that are here to view. As you can see, we also have lots of full body mounts and just lots of cool stuff
sitting
here.
in front of a really cool bull elk full body mount in velvet. You're not going to beat a backdrop like this all the time.
Yeah, and so it's just a really cool place. We also offer a lot of programs for kids. We have school programs. The teachers will bring them here, and we'll teach them about wildlife on the different species. We have a lot of Project Wild education programs that we give, becoming an outdoor woman. We have archery outside where the kids can, do the 3D archery range. So there's just lots of cool things here that's going on.
Heck yeah, man.
We walked in and I felt like a kid.
Yeah.
I was like, who wouldn't like this place?
Oh, yeah.
It's awesome.
I mean, for kids, for adults, come. I mean, they got so much stuff here that you could spend 2 hours here just reading everything and learning
totally
all the different stuff that they got going on.
Yeah, you and Wes were talking and I was just ignoring and just looking around. It's like, the adults are doing their thing. I'll be a kid for a moment.
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
Cool place.
It's awesome. So, yeah, definitely check it out next time you're rolling through Ponca. Right across from BOC. We interviewed Mike earlier this year right across the street. So this little spot of the state is a cool little gym, like we said. But like I said, we want to talk the story of the elk and get into some, at the end, I want to talk a little bit about elk hunting opportunities, how the draw works and all that, because I know there's not a whole lot of tags that get drawn and stuff like that. So just curious how it works to hear from you and share that with our audience. But before we go there, let's start with kind of intro of you. Let's start with just where'd you grow up, and then we can get into what you do as the elk program coordinator. Like what does that mean? What does kind of the day-to-day look like? But where are you from?
Yeah, so I was raised in Harrison, just up the road. It's just a few miles away from here. Little town outside of Harrison called Batavia. And so anyways, I'm a local boy. I've always, grown up floating the Buffalo River and hunting these areas, that are close, these different WMAs. And so anyways, this is home to me.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I was able to make it back here and have this job. And I really appreciate, all the opportunities that it's given me to be back around my family and to work, in this kind of environment, every day.
Which is kind of, I don't know if rare is the right word, but it's not all the time, because a lot of times to be a wildlife biologist, you got to go get extra schooling, get your master's degree, go off to another state, wherever there's kind of an available job, maybe do a research project or something. And there's not always an opportunity to come back to like where you're from or where you might want to be all the time, right?
Yeah, so it kind of worked out. It's almost like it was meant to be. I actually came back and worked for about a year temporary on the burn crew, and just so happened a biologist position came open. Initially, I was a field biologist in Region 8, and I worked on Gene Rush Wildlife Management Area, as the area manager. And then in 2011, the previous elk coordinator went back to the deer program, and so that left the elk program open. And so I was just kind of here in the right spot at the right time, and it worked out. And again, I've been in this position for about 12 years now. Okay. I've been with the agency for 16 years. I got my degree from Arkansas Tech University. I graduated there in
the Wonder Boys.
Yeah, spring of 2005. And I had a little stint with Walmart. I was an assistant manager at Morrilton for a few years.
Yeah.
And again, just took a leap of faith and quit a good paying job to come work for the Game and Fish as a temporary, extra labor. And again, it worked out. And
what made you want to do that?
It
Because it's easy to get in a job and start making some good money and just kind of stick it out and stay. So to make that jump and take that leap of faith, what inspired that move?
Yeah, like I said, I've always been raised here, hunting and fishing. That's always been, the main thing that I was ever interested in was just being outdoors, hunting and fishing and floating. And so, that part of me was always there. And when I went to school, I knew I wanted to go biology. And so that kind of started me down the road to the fisheries and wildlife side. And anyways, it's just where my heart's at to be outdoors and working with wildlife. Stuck in a retail store, 7 days a week, just it wasn't cutting it for me.
Yeah.
I just, even though I had to take a large pay cut, it was just something I wanted to do, and my interest kind of took me there.
Yeah, heck yeah, man, that's awesome. So let's get into now as the elk program coordinator and elk biologist. What is overarching? What are your responsibilities in your day-to-day job now?
Yeah, so pretty much anything elk related.
Okay. So you're the head honcho when it comes to elk.
Yeah, so anything administrative duties, any research, any just the day-to-day things, the elk festival, the elk hunts, that's all part of my duties to administer all of that stuff. But I'm a biologist in the Region 6 area, which, that covers most of Northwest Arkansas.
Okay.
And so I'm also, doing turkey work and working with bears and with deer, of course, because of chronic wasting disease, being in the elk and the deer, I'm a big part of the CWD program. So that takes up quite a bit of time in the fall. In the winter, we have the deer and elk seasons going on.
Right.
But I'll still help with bear dens, in the wintertime and some of the turkey trapping that we had going on a few years ago. So anyways, I kind of get a wide range of things.
That's
but
a
my
good
main
spread of stuff.
Yes, but my main thing is to deal with anything related to elk.
Okay.
So it's elk biologist, but also just wildlife biologist as a whole.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
What was the term we learned with what was AJ when we went to the bear den? The tunnel rat?
Yes, she's
trying
the
to remember
smallest
what
one
you
that
were
always
asking.
has to climb in the, because most of those holes going into those dens are pretty small.
They're
small.
surprisingly small.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, have you ever had to be the tunnel rat along some of these missions?
I have been the tunnel rat.
Okay.
Of course, that was several pounds ago.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've gotten a little bit bigger than what I used to be. Right out of college, I was a lot thinner and
Sure.
could
Everyone is.
could fit in those holes. But now I'll probably get lodged, and
Yeah.
I think Myron's right there with me too.
Yeah.
That's why we send AJ in.
Yeah, keeping y'all out of the getting stuck in there.
I remember that
It's a
he kept
rescue mission.
referring to her as that, and we were all listening to him do his 30-minute deal that we ended up recording.
Yeah.
And all of us looking at each other like, what in the world's a tunnel
What is a
rat?
tunnel rat? What
And
does that
then
mean?
we were thinking probably what it meant, and we were
Yeah.
surprised to learn it's exactly what
Yep.
they meant.
That's who crawls
She
in the
goes
hole.
head first into the hole and gets the bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Which can be very intimidating too.
oh yeah,
I mean,
I can't imagine crawling in there
yeah. So she's got nerves of steel.
face to
Surely
face with a
does.
mama bear and her cubs.
Well, and you think those bear dens are going to be like cartoon style bear dens, right? A big open face, and you walk in, there's a bear.
Yeah.
I mean, you could walk past those every single time you're out in the woods and never know it.
Yes.
They're so small.
Absolutely. So you get to do a lot of different stuff. Kind of is the point.
Yes, unfortunately I get to deal with pretty much any species of mammals that we have.
Gotcha. Okay. So maybe we jump straight in because I think I've heard the story before, and I think everyone kind of has somewhat of a baseline understanding that elk are native in Arkansas. They were here for a long time. At some point, they kind of disappeared. They were overhunted, loss of habitat, what have you. Start from the beginning. I don't know, when you tell the story, because I assume you tell this story a lot as you educate people and people come here to the nature center or just in your line of work. Where do you start with the story of the elk in Arkansas, and where should we start right now?
Yeah, so elk are native to this part of North America. Historically, we would have had the eastern elk here, which is just a little bit smaller species than what we have here, which is the Rocky Mountain subspecies. But Again, in the end, they're all North American elk.
Okay.
But they were native here, pre-white man. So due to overhunting and loss of habitat, exploitation, by the 1840s, the elk, the eastern elk was extirpated, and there wasn't many reports of them after, the mid 1840s.
Okay.
So we went, a pretty good time span, over 100 years without elk here in the state. There was a small reintroduction in the 1930s that the U.S. Forest Service tried down on White Rock, WMA.
Okay.
They brought in a few elk, and it was thought that they got up to about 200 elk at one point in time, but kind of the same thing, unregulated hunting, loss of habitat. By the 1950s, that reintroduction had failed.
It's interesting that they would go ahead and do a reintroduction, but then not set up regulations around it to prevent overhunting or unregulated hunting, and just kind of dive in head first regardless.
Yeah, and of course in that time frame there was the Game and Fish Commission that were setting regulations, but it was a lot different then than it is now. You still had, especially in these really remote rural areas, I mean, people kind of did what they wanted.
Sure.
And people were just trying to survive.
Yeah,
and
subsistence
of course,
hunting.
And an elk could provide a lot of meat for your family, so I'm sure that played into
Yeah.
it. But there again, by the 1950s they were gone. And so we had about a 30-year period where there was no elk again. And so fast forward to the 1980s, we had a commissioner, Hillary Jones, which is the one that kind of spearheaded the project of, hey, let's bring elk back to Arkansas. Of course, looking at a lot of other states, between the 1950s and the 60s, there was lots of deer reintroductions, lots of turkey, of course, bear,
Right.
like here in the state. And so it was kind of a common thing for states to try to put back native species so that you could, restore what wildlife was originally there. And so in 1981, the commission, we pretty much took a bunch of old beat-up trucks and stock trailers to Colorado.
Yeah.
And we loaded up 112 elk.
And a bunch of lassos
Yeah.
to catch some elk.
And it was my understanding that the Arkansas Game and Fish traded some smallmouth bass fingerlings for some elk. And
It's a pretty good trade.
yeah,
That is a good
so
trade.
so we ended up
That's
with
cool.
112 elk.
Colorado, they took smallmouth bass.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's, from what research I've done,
Yeah.
that was kind of the trade there.
cool.
So anyways, we had the Buffalo River here, which was established in the 1970s. 1972 is when it started. And so we had all this public land. Here in Newton County, where they were first released, is like 60% public land. With the Ozarks National Forest and Piney Creek's WMA. Of course, we had Gene Rush Wildlife Management Area, which is a state-owned area.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got 100,000 acres of Buffalo National River. So it was just a perfect place, for the elk to thrive. And they did some surveys on, the feasibility of elk surviving on the buffalo, and it was pretty high. And so anyways, between 81 and 85, 112 elk were brought in and released on the Buffalo River. And we've had as many, on our aerial surveys, we've counted as many as 620, as far as a minimum population.
Yeah.
And that's on top of almost 1,000 elk that have been harvested through our legal hunt over the years.
Okay.
Wow.
When did that season first open? If they were, you said reintroduced in 81?
81 through 85.
Was the hunting immediately available? Were you allowed to immediately hunt them, or did it take a couple of years?
Yeah, we didn't have a hunt until 1998 was our first
wow.
first Arkansas elk hunt.
So you gave them a good while to get established.
Yeah, so they had a pretty good time frame there to grow the population. And of course,
I say you.
Yeah, that was
Not-
long. I was
Not you
yeah, I
in
was
particular.
still in diapers at that
Sure,
point.
yeah.
When the elk were released. But yeah, there was a long time frame there where they were very conservative. Of course, we wanted to grow the elk herd with the thought that one day we would have an elk hunt here in Arkansas, and it's been very successful.
What do you think the current population is today in August of 2023?
So we do an aerial survey each year. We fly a helicopter around and we do a historical survey. We counted 419 elk this year, which it is down a little bit, but that's because chronic wasting disease was discovered in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did quite a bit of target surveillance. We increased quotas to help lower the elk population somewhat. At that point in time, we didn't know how wide-ranging CWD was going to be.
Right.
And so we kind of put some hard lines in the sand to say, you know, until we get our hands wrapped around how bad CWD is and how far it's going to range, we don't want elk, you know, leaving the current zone to possibly spread it to white-tailed deer in other parts of the state. Because we know that elk have a lot larger home range than whitetails. And we knew that potential was there for them to, you know, if they take a notion to leave, they can go a long ways in a short period of time.
Right.
So our population is down a little bit, but we're kind of seeing that CWD is a lot wider ranging than our current elk range. So we're starting to take more of a conservative approach to help bring that population back up. But to answer your question, 419, we can say at least
Okay.
that many.
That's cool.
That is cool.
Y'all do that in the fall, or is it?
It's in late winter.
Okay.
So typically like the month of February.
Okay.
So it's
That's
right
awesome.
before green up.
After the harvest.
Yes, after the harvest.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
No
that
leaves on the
also
trees.
Yeah.
that gives us a good snapshot of how many calves survived. You know, because typically if a calf can survive till that point in time, it's right before green up, they'll
make it.
They'll make
Gotcha.
it. So that gives us a good count on the reproduction as well.
Gotcha. I want to go back to something you said when they were looking at reintroducing and they were kind of looking at this area. What about it did they find that about this area in particular that made it attractive and a viable habitat for elk? And then does that remain today? Like, what makes this area so beneficial for elk and you know, viable for them to live here?
Yeah, of course, like I said, the Buffalo River was a big part. We knew from that feasibility study that, you know, these elk will travel like river corridors. So we had that there. When the Buffalo National River was established, there were already lots of open hayfields that were there. And part of the historic part of the Buffalo River was to maintain that pastoral setting,
Right.
To keep those openings that were there when the park was established, to keep those open over time. And, you know, either by bush hogging or burning, or they actually have some hay permits that they'll allow local farmers to come in and cut hay to help manage those fields. You know, having those big openings is a key part for elk. Of course, you know, they graze part of the time.
Right.
Part of the time, you know, through the growing season, they'll browse like a deer as well, which we know that from some research that we've done on. We did an elk forage study. So we'll look at the pellets and see what the elk eat, you know, on a monthly basis, and that tells us what they're utilizing at certain periods of time. But through the winter time, that's a key component, is to have those open hayfields, you know, with cool season grasses that have been established.
Yeah.
And same thing on Gene Rush Wildlife Management areas, that we have a lot of those open fields, and that's a key component. Of course, we have had a little bit of issues with you know, private land, nuisance elk over time. You know, of course, if they like the hayfields on the Buffalo River, they're going to like, you know, the farmers' hayfields as well.
Right.
Which we've tried to work with a lot of those, you know, people having nuisance issues, you know, either through aversive conditioning, you know, try to haze the elk to push them back. But the main thing that
Haze
we do,
the elk?
Yeah. So
I think of like fraternity hazing
Yeah.
when I hear the word
yeah,
haze.
it's similar to that. It's
On your knees and elbows.
yeah. So it's using like rubber slugs, rubber
Okay.
buckshot.
Yeah,
You can
just
shoot them at a
deterrent.
close distance, you know, because they'll get into gardens, things like that.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want. You know,
Right.
of course, deer and other species can ruin gardens as well, but, you know, elk can also do that. Also, like electric fencing, you know, things like that. We'll just try to let the elk know that they're not wanted in those areas.
Yeah, deter them.
One key thing that, probably the best thing that we can do, is if we can plant something that's more attractive to the elk than what the farmer has, then those elk are going to utilize the public land more.
Makes sense.
Gotcha.
And so that's where we'll do a lot of plantings of annual boards, you know, through the wintertime. We'll do like winter wheat, oats, rye. We'll do some summer plots as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the prescribed burning. You know, we knew from that forage study that they were browsing like a deer, utilizing the woodland species a lot during that time, which is right when hay season's going on, you know, when the farmers have their hay fields. So our prescribed burning has really increased over the years. We've done a lot of timber thinning on our WMAs, and just encouraging those woodland species, which are really, I mean, as far as looking at the protein levels compared to grasses, I mean, you have twice as much protein.
So much higher.
Yeah, it's higher quality, so it's better for the elk and the deer. Of course, it's going to benefit turkeys and other species as well. A lot of those woodland areas will come back with wildflowers, and so your pollinators, have a positive impact as well. So it just goes hand in hand with, what's good for elk. A lot of times is good for other species as well.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think some of the decision to bring them to this area too is just the sheer numbers of public acreage? Like just knowing that you have a newly established national forest area on top of already Arkansas-owned public land. That, along with the river and the mountains and everything else, is that kind of why they keyed in on this area specifically?
Yeah, there's no doubt that was one of the big factors of that feasibility study and saying, okay, this could actually work here.
Right.
We've had a lot of people over the years, ask about like the Ouachitas. Can we stock elk in the Ouachitas? They would probably survive. They had a feasibility study on that as well. But the only difference is you have a lot more private land scattered throughout the forest. And we kind of learned from this reintroduction that we would probably have lots of nuisance issues, lots of fence damage, things like that. So there's no doubt that just the way this area is set up with the Ozark National Forest, joining the Buffalo National River, which joins Gene Rush Wildlife Management Area. And then if you go south of there, you hit Piney Creek's WMA and Bearcat Hollow. And then there's also a pine restoration area that goes all the way down to like Gulf Mountain near Clinton.
Okay.
So there's just a huge kind of corridor throughout the forest and on state lands where there's a tremendous amount of public land that's, just perfect for elk habitat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Whenever they were reintroduced and going back, I'm curious if there were any studies around like impacts on the ecosystem. I know they're native, and I know that they have been here historically, but coming back in, I think about like the ecological impacts in like Yellowstone when they, added the wolves back in, and then the elk population went down, so there were less saplings on the river, which created more erosion, and like there was just all these, hundreds of impacts downstream from one move. Anytime you reintroduce a species like that, are there loads and loads of studies that go into that, and then studies on the back end to say like, yes, this did and didn't happen, and this is what we're monitoring?
Yeah, definitely. When the park was established, the Buffalo River, they did an environmental assessment of all the species that were there. And of course, at the time, being that it was the 1970s, the elk wasn't here yet. So they wasn't included in the original environmental assessment. But later on, they did do a second follow-up assessment to see, what the impacts would be. And their findings is that it would have no ecological impact as far as, negative impacts.
Right.
Because it was a natural, occurring species. And also that's where it comes into, us managing the population numbers,
Sure.
As far as how much public land is available, and that's not even counting the private land that they might utilize. The number of elk that we have is very minimal compared to what the environment could actually sustain.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
Which
it's like
would
a
be
big,
called
big deer.
Yeah, which would be like the carrying capacity of the land.
Correct.
Like we're below the threshold that it would be to impact the land in a negative way and take food, available forage away from other species.
Correct.
It's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Do the whitetail and the elk ever mingle? This is probably my last elk reintroduction question, but not mingle like sexually. You're not gonna have a hybrid, but
do they go to the same watering holes?
Well, yeah,
local bars.
yeah, the local spots. But you're talking about having elk be pulled off of private land to the public land with some of the better forage areas and food plots that are built in, that kind of thing. Do y'all ever see whitetail out there with them? Because you're naming off some things that deer hunters plant,
Sure.
right, to keep their deer around.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the whitetail and the elk, not saying they'll just be, like right there side by side, but definitely, lots of times I've seen elk and deer utilizing the same field, they'll just kind of be maybe 100 yards apart or something, but it doesn't seem to really bother them.
That's pretty cool.
That is cool.
I just want to see that.
Yeah, no, that does sound cool. Okay, well, we peppered you with some questions there. I'll let you continue the story. So they were reintroduced. The first hunt was in 1998. I think that's kind of where we cut you off there.
1998. At that point, our population had gotten to a point where the commission felt that we could sustain, a small, limited hunt. And early on, it was just a few permits. And I hate to say it was a novelty, but it kind of was just a way to, you know, to slowly ease into hunting the elk without having any major impacts to the population. We also early
How were
on,
those tags drawn initially?
yeah. So we have the elk festival in Jasper, and back in the day before the electronic applications, you just filled out a paper application and you put your name in a hat. And so we've got a squirrel cage. It's actually the original one that
Still
they
the same
use, so
one?
we're still using it.
Oh, that's cool.
But we'll have the Buffalo River Elk Festival the last weekend of June each year, and we'll throw all the applications in there. And they have a pageant, the Elk Festival pageant. So we'll usually have the beauty queens that have won come up and get a chance to draw the names out.
That's cool.
And the people get to watch us do all of that up on stage, instead of it just being a computer
Right.
drawing and you get an email. So it adds a little bit of, I guess, flair to how we do things. And till this day, we still continue that trend. Of course, we have the applications online now. And this last year, we had almost 8,000 people that put in for the hunt.
Wow.
That's the highest.
I was one of the. This is my first year to do it because I was like, I got to start eventually.
As was I.
If I'm ever gonna get the chance.
Yeah, that's the highest that we've had as far as applications since 2007. So it was a pretty good year. Of course, our communications division did a really good job of pushing that message, and with social media and all that, we can really push out the time to do that. But there was a time back in 1998, 1999 where we had as many as 15,000 applications.
Wow.
And so it was a pretty big deal. So that's how we drew for the public land tags. We also had a small portion of private land, whereas if the private landowners could put in for tags, and it was a very limited hunt, but we would draw for those, and they could hunt some private land. One other aspect that we had, so the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation was the initial person that did the draw, but because they had put so much stock into the reintroduction, they had helped the state out with funding and manpower. The Game and Fish Commission decided to give them a couple permits to auction off, and then any of the proceeds from that auction would come right back to the elk program for more habitat work, for more burning, things like that. But initially, those tags were bringing anywhere from $45,000 to $50,000 for a bull permit on public land.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so we had
That's
people,
insane.
from California. There's one gentleman, I think actually the elk that's downstairs that we were looking at, he had donated that. That's the gentleman from California that paid like $47,000 for that elk.
Just to come hunt elk
Just
here.
to come hunt.
Wow.
And then he gives us the elk to showcase in our nature center.
That's pretty cool.
For everyone to see. So yeah, we're able to get the hunt going. We're generating funds now. We're creating a lot of positivity for the elk program, and from the late 90s up until today, really, it just continues to grow as far as people coming to view elk, and because a lot of people in Arkansas don't even know we have elk.
Yeah.
If they've never been to Ponca.
I just last night, there was one of our followers on Instagram. He messaged me and he was like, "Hey man, I just moved to Colorado. I was talking to my buddy up here. He doesn't believe me that we have elk in Arkansas." And he was like, "I think it'd be really cool." I think his name was Graham. So shout out to Graham. He was saying, "Man, it'd be cool if y'all did an episode on elk." And I was like, "That's kind of weird that you're saying that, because tomorrow night we were literally going to talk to Wes." And he was like, "Oh man, that's cool." But yeah, to your point, definitely people outside of the state of Arkansas, probably very few know that. I'm surprised to hear even within the state that people don't know that, because that to me is like a selling point of like, man, look how cool this place is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people. I've met them down here on the side of the road at Boxley Valley in our viewing area, and they're saying the same thing. They're just like, "Man, I didn't even know that we had elk here. This is so cool," because you can be within like 100 yards of them. And they're just out there, grazing in the field. And of course, in our viewing area, we don't have any hunting. So they act a little bit different down here than what they do in the areas where we have, established hunting zones. But it's just, it's a really cool place to come. People can bring their kids, and You don't have to drive to Colorado to see elk. You
Yeah.
can just drive a couple of hours from, say, Little Rock or
Seriously.
Northwest Fayetteville area.
Yeah, we were an hour drive from
Yeah.
where we met up.
So you've got a ton of people in Fayetteville that don't know that there's elk, within an hour, hour and a half.
That's crazy.
And so that's why I think each year it just continues to grow, and we'll have tons of people come down here. The Buffalo River, even 10, 15 years ago, it was a popular place, but it seems like the last 5 to 8 years, it's really picked up on the amount of people that are coming here.
Sure.
They're saying over 1 million visitors a year to the
Yeah.
Buffalo River, and a high percentage of those were going to come right through Boxley Valley and see our elk herd.
Yeah,
So we're getting a lot of publicity, and
absolutely. Especially with COVID, people had nothing to do being outside on the river. I know the Buffalo saw so many more floaters actually on the water getting outside, which is great for people to get outside and see it all. So yeah, I totally believe it.
It's a good trend.
Absolutely.
Happy to see the outdoor pursuit kind of be on the up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the generations above us are really terrified about it, and I don't know. I feel like we run into people every day who are just getting into fishing or just getting into hunting or really about floating, and I don't know if it's like as technology advances, man just feels this urge to not go that way the whole time, and
yeah.
I don't know. We can't put our finger on it, but that's amazing to hear that we have 1 million people coming through and seeing our elk, and for the first time going, oh man, Arkansas is elk.
Yeah, what
That's
the heck?
awesome.
That's a really big deer over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking, about the local economy, I mean, that brings a tremendous amount of funds into Newton County, which, I told you earlier that, 60% of this county is public land. And so that takes a lot of your tax base out because, some of these agencies, don't pay the same tax that a private landowner would because it's in public ownership. And so, there's lots of cabins that people have built for people that come to view the elk. They're
Right.
renting cabins, and they're buying groceries at the grocery store, and they're eating at the local diners, and so it's really been a boost to the economy. That one of the counties in the state that's probably towards the bottom end as far as the amount of funds that are brought in. Well, just like Elk Fest alone for the city of Jasper and for the Newton County. It's sometimes the highest tax weekend, or it'll be number 2. Bikes, Blues, and Barbecue is actually a really big one too. Of course,
Yeah.
we'll have tons of motorcycles come through, which
Oh, yeah.
again, same thing. They're coming down here to view the elk. They're taking a couple hour drive from Fayetteville, come down here to view the elk, see the buffalo, and then they can make a circle back to Northwest Arkansas.
That drive on a motorcycle would be pretty phenomenal too.
Yes.
It's just a beautiful drive.
Yeah.
So ecotourism is
Mhm.
huge for us with the elk. We're able to raise a lot of funds for the local community by having these elk here. So, they're affecting, not only the hunters, they get the opportunity to hunt and the private landowners, but the ecotourism is a big deal.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, so from the late 90s to, I guess 2016 when CWD was discovered, were things just kind of coasting along? Things were good. People were drawing a couple tags every year, hunting along, or were there any projects mixed in those years that we were learning things? There were insights into what's happening with the elk herd. They're skyrocketing, population skyrocketing. We got to bring them back down. Like what? Just some of the ebbs and flows. I'm just curious how that worked.
Yeah, like I said, we had done that aerial survey since 1991, so we had continually to see the elk population increase. We got to the late 90s, and we had enough to have the hunt. So we're just kind of cruising along, doing the elk hunts and all this habitat work, and trying to grow the elk herd. We had a few research projects along the way, just giving us some very valuable data. We had I talked about the elk forage study where we're looking at what elk are utilizing throughout the year. So that was a big one. That was a multi-year project of we would go out and we'd pick up really fresh pellets on a monthly basis. And then a lab could do a microhistological analysis on that and actually tell us each plant species that's in that fecal matter.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Microhistological.
Yeah, microhistological analysis. So pretty much looking through a microscope and pulling that pellet apart piece by piece and say, okay, that's, whatever species of plant.
Okay.
And that's how we could tell, throughout the year how their diet was changing.
Gotcha.
They're utilizing a lot of those woodland species, the grasses and the forbs, browsing like a deer. And then as the dormant season comes, they're transitioning more into those open fields, some of the domestic grasses. Start seeing fescue and orchard grass show up, the clovers, things like that.
Okay.
And so we got a lot of information about, the elk was telling us what it kind of preferred.
Yeah.
And so we kind of utilized that study to tell us what we needed to be planning in our wildlife openings. Of course, that led to more prescribed burning and
Sure.
timber thinning. So that kind of was cruising along. And then 2016, I got the dreaded phone call in late February that, one of our elk that we had pulled a sample off of from the 2015 hunt had come back positive, which there was a little bit of a delay there because the elk that came back positive wasn't a target or one that was sick or showing neurological symptoms. So what we typically did is we just, throughout the seasons on elk and deer, because we'd send them in together, we would just gather all those samples in a big box, and then once the seasons was over, we'd do one shipment.
Yeah.
And so that sample happened to be in there, and we sent those to the CWD lab in Wisconsin, and they called back and said, "Hey, we've got a hot one." And
Wow. And at that point, so 2016, was CWD rampant in other areas? Like, I'm kind of just curious, was that a shock to you? And did you even know what CWD was at the time?
I did know what CWD was. Of course, that's, as far as being a big game manager,
Sure.
That's always something that you're looking for. Of course, we were testing for it, and unfortunately just, hadn't found it up until then. We even started testing up like 2002, shortly after the elk hunt
I was
started.
gonna say, 'cause if you guys are already taking samples, you must know of some prevalence elsewhere.
That was just routine surveillance.
Yeah.
And of course, we were also doing some of that target surveillance, which we had talked about a little earlier. If you see an elk that's just acting a little bit funny, we'll go out and sample that elk, just to make sure. And we had done that for years and had never found one. Of course, the way CWD is, for a long period of time, it kind of flatlines and it grows very slowly, and it's very difficult to find it when it's in low prevalence. But then once it hits that point where it becomes exponential and it starts spreading like wildfire, essentially, then it becomes obvious pretty quickly.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of where we found ourselves. But your question about was other states looking for it? They were. So in 2002, which is when we originally started looking for it, Wisconsin had went positive.
Okay.
Of course, Colorado, they had found it in the late 60s, and it was still kind of unknown what it was.
I didn't know it went back that far.
Yeah, so they knew something was going on, but even up until the 1980s when we brought the elk here, CWD wasn't talked about. They knew very little about it. But anyways, in like 2002, Wisconsin went positive, and a lot of states learned from Wisconsin. So they tried to eradicate the disease. They went in and they started shooting every deer, within the hot zone. And, that agency took it over the head from their public because they're going in and killing, tremendous amounts of deer and trying to eradicate
That's
it.
quite the reaction.
Yeah, and so they found out real quickly that even after they went in and eradicated deer from the original hotspot, they had another hotspot show up, and then another hotspot.
It's just not going to work.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they figured, okay, so that
Spread too quick.
Yeah.
Once they found it,
it's
found
already
something.
there.
Yeah, that
By
makes
the time
sense.
you're finding it, if you're finding a sick deer, it's already probably in others as well.
Yeah.
But we were able to learn from their mistakes. Essentially, hate to say it was a mistake because they didn't know. They were just trying to
testing. You got to try several different methods. I mean, that's part of the. And you would know so much more about this than me, but the scientific method is like you got to test all these different options, see which one, because that might have worked. If it had eradicated it, you'd be like, we'd be sitting here like praising them, right?
Yeah. So in the early to mid 2000s, CWD, after Wisconsin went positive, was a big deal. Everybody was testing for it. That's kind of when we started testing. Other states started testing. And it actually it didn't show up in many places. Wisconsin was kind of the big one. Of course, we knew it was out west, Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska, kind of in the western part. And so we fast forward up until about 2010, it kind of died out. And there was a lot of federal funding that became available for testing, after that Wisconsin. And so up till about 2010, a lot of that funding was starting to run out. And so a lot of the states, were just kind of like, well, we've tested and we're not finding it. And so it kind of died down for a while. Then Missouri found it at a very low prevalence, and it was actually in a captive facility.
A what?
A captive facility where people have captive deer.
Like pet deer?
Yeah, like high fence.
Okay, yeah.
And so they started testing around that facility, and they found it on the outside. And so 2010, it kind of got ramped back up a little bit. But to be honest with you, Arkansas was when it really, started kicking off big time again because, we came out of the gate with such a high prevalence, and everyone realized, like, okay, so if it happened to Arkansas, it can happen to us as well.
Yeah.
You could have a pretty big problem and not know about it.
Right.
And so in 2016 is when it really kind of resurged, and you started seeing lots of other states. Of course, Mississippi and Tennessee was shortly after us. Now you've had Louisiana.
You said Oklahoma.
Oklahoma was just
recently.
recent, like within the last couple months.
Oh, wow.
So that one just came out, I believe, in May, like mid-May.
And is that so? You're saying in 2016 it was found in an elk, and that was the first case. It wasn't a whitetail first.
It was in an elk first.
Wow.
And it was kind of just the way it worked out. So we had pulled that routine surveillance sample off of the elk, from a harvested elk that fall, and it came back positive. Well, in that same batch, there was a target deer right out here in the yard of this facility.
Really?
There was a deer, and of course, there was the picture of the one drooling on the wall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a picture of the one that was here that was very similar. There was a doe that showed up out here. She just wasn't acting right, was drooling. And the facility manager at that time, Mary Ann Hicks, she actually lives right across the road, and she's retired now. But she had called and said, there's this deer out here in the yard that's acting kind of weird. And just the timing of it was like, okay. So we've had this elk come back positive. Now we have this sick deer. So we came and we sampled her, and she came back positive. So we had our first elk and our first deer almost back to back.
Back to back.
And just so happened it came out of at the time, the Ponca Elk Center's
How
yard.
about that? Seriously.
Yeah. So it
Literally brought it to Game and Fish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here I am. Here's the proof.
I mean, that's how it kind of seemed.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just pretty eerie how it worked out.
Yeah,
but
that is kind of crazy.
so now we have CWD in 2 species, and at that point we had our CWD response plan that had already been drafted in the mid 2000s. I believe like 2006 they'd put that together, just anticipating that, hey, we're going to have this on the shelf.
Yeah.
And if it ever hits, then we're going to have a plan.
We'll be ready.
Right out of the gate instead of having to be caught on our heels. So
That's pretty cool that happened that way, that you guys would be prepared as an agency for something like that. I'm sure there's probably other plans in place now that we hopefully won't have to use in the future, but maybe are already being prepared.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely helped us a lot because we came, from day one, we already said, okay, we're going to follow this plan.
Yeah.
And so we had marching orders, okay, here's what we're going to do. And we started following that plan. And
So what was the plan?
well, first of all, it was putting in the regulations. We at the time we had like the 3-point rule here. So what you're doing by having the 3-point rule is you're saving younger bucks, which, for big buck management, that's what you want to do, is you don't want to kill a bunch of young ones. But for CWD, we knew that the bucks had the higher prevalence. And so by saving those younger bucks, they're the ones that have a tendency to disperse farther distances. They're getting pushed outside of the other dominant bucks' home ranges. So we knew by saving those younger bucks that are going to potentially move farther distances was bad. So that'd be one of the regulations that we did. We took the
Gotcha.
3-point rule off.
And that was as a result of CWD.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yep. So that was one of the first things we did, was to start trying to put, again, that hard line in the sand around and say, okay, we got to get our hands wrapped around where is CWD at this point, because we can't stop it if we don't know where it's at. So another thing was the baiting and feeding. We outlawed that for the majority of the year. Prior to CWD, you could have corn out for your deer, year round.
Year round.
And we knew that was a big potential to spread the disease, by having deer congregating in one area.
That saliva's in the corn. Now the next year comes along, picks it up.
So that was another thing that was in our response plan, is to do that. So a lot of regulation stuff that was spawned by that. Also, we had a sampling plan. And so we knew just by other states like Wisconsin that you needed to look at least 5 or 10 miles. It'd be actually it's 5 miles from the spot, but then if you look at your diameter, you look at a 10-mile area around that hotspot. Because in a normal situation, CWD can move about a mile per year. That's if man doesn't move, a carcass or anything. So just in a naturally occurring situation, it can move at about that rate at a low prevalence. So we came in and we did that circle, with the 10-mile.
With this being ground zero.
Yes.
That's great.
And so what we actually had, we had the elk that was up around Pruitt. We had this deer here. So we had 2 hot spots that were pretty close. And you may have heard about it looked like a racetrack. It was actually an oval. Instead of having 2 circles, because they overlap, we just did a giant, it looked like a NASCAR racetrack.
Yeah.
And so we had 2 hot spots. And if you look at CWD, and this is going back to research from other states, to have a 95% confidence that you'll find it if it's there at a 1% prevalence, you need to kill 300 deer.
Oh,
That's insane.
So we came in and we killed actually 266 is what we ended up harvesting. But what that will tell you is that if it's there and you kill 300 deer, you'll find it again if it's at least 1% prevalence.
okay.
And if it's higher,
Yeah, you're going to find it a
you
lot
find
more.
a lot more.
And that's the reason we didn't harvest 300, because we had went out for a couple weeks. We had, we had a bunch of game and fish biologists come out, and, we're going out and we were shooting deer. And we had sent that initial batch off to Wisconsin. And of course, we're still here shooting deer because it takes a few days for the samples to get there and to get ran.
And to kill that many deer takes a few days.
Yeah, and it seems like, of course, don't quote me on these numbers because they start running together, but it seems like the initial batch, we had like 65 samples that we sent in, and 19 of them were positive.
Oh, wow.
So we knew initially,
You're like way above a 1% prevalence.
Yeah, and so at the time, our administration said, all right, let's shut it down. Killing another 40 deer and is not, we already know that the problem's a lot worse than what we had anticipated. So that's why we cut it off at 266 and didn't go all the way to the 300. So we kind of, for lack of better terms, we stepped back and punted. And so we knew that racetrack isn't even close to being the boundaries of our CWD. So that's when we started kind of ranging out. We started our freezer program that we have now, where each county has at least 2 freezers where the hunters can drop a head off, and we'll sample that free of charge. And so that helps us with surveillance of the disease to find it in areas where we might not know where it's at this point.
And you're tracking prevalence along the way, I assume. And well, so back to 19 to 65, you're saying we're right at about a 30% prevalence. And then as you got to the 266, was that consistent? And then how was the prevalence, like that percentage kind of changed?
Yeah, it stayed consistent with the rest of the samples that we got back. Of course, the bucks are a little bit higher than the does. And of course, the older the age class, the higher the prevalence goes.
Yeah.
But what we found very alarming right out of the gate is that we had several fawns that were positive, which other states hadn't even found that. But it was the timing, too. Most fawns are sampled in the fall, when the hunting seasons go on. So they're, 6 months, less than 6 months old at that point. And so CWD really hasn't had a time, even if they're positive, it hadn't had time to really generate enough for the sample to catch it.
Okay.
So we were killing these deer in March, because we got the original sample back in February, the positive, and then it took a little while to set that plan in place. So in March is when we did our racetrack sampling. And so we're shooting, 10 or 11-month-old fawns at this point. And they did have enough time, for the disease to show up in the sample at this point. So that's when we started finding, a percentage of our fawns that were positive. And again, other states that had done CWD surveillance had never found it in a fawn before. Wow. And so again, we knew, okay, this is...
Yeah, we've got an issue.
Yes.
Man. So fast forward to today, now, the past couple of years, since 2016, since Ground Zero, like, what has been the focus and kind of where are we at today? Like, what is the work that you're doing in current research on CWD and where are we at today?
Yeah, so it seems like a lifetime ago, but again, there's been lots of long days and long nights of, doing sampling and CWD work. But in the end, we still have deer, we still have elk. Of course, we still have CWD as well, but we've done a lot of research on the deer and the elk side. We've done a lot of genetic work, and so we're looking at genotype versus CWD result. So we want to know, of the positives, is there a certain genotype that's more susceptible?
Okay.
And then also of the negatives, is there going to be a genotype that's going to be less resistant or more resistant?
Are there genetic indicators that are going to say this specific deer is going to be way more susceptible than the next
Exactly.
one?
So we can start looking
That's
at
insane.
That is crazy.
That's really cool.
When you say genotype, is that like that's not a different species, right? Like that's within the same species. A genotype would be like familial ties, like kind of blood
Yes.
relative to, stranger.
Yeah, so if you look across the state, different areas are going to have different genotypes of deer. So,
Okay.
There are certain barriers, like the Arkansas River, for instance, that you'll see. And that's not saying that it's an exact hard line. You'll still see some of that spillover, but definitely the deer like in the Ozarks is different genotype than the deer in the Ouachitas
Yeah.
or the River Valley.
Okay.
And so we were looking at that to figure out kind of what you had said is if we can figure out which ones are more susceptible, then we can look at our different, ecoregions for our like on our deer herds. We can look in the different ecoregions and kind of forecast what we think.
Mhm.
If CWD gets there, is it going to be really bad? Is it going to spread like wildfire? Or is it going to be, a little bit slower in the spread? Is there going to be more resistance? So there was a lot of work that went on. First of all, we had to get those genotypes. We had to figure out, what our different deer herds, look like genetically. And that research is still kind of ongoing today. It's not something that you can just do overnight.
Yeah, I was about to say that seems like a huge effort.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's part of the research that's going on right now. As far as the elk,
Are you finding substantial, significant differences in any genotypes at this point?
there's definitely some indicators that show that there is some difference for sure.
Okay.
Some are going to be more resistant. Some are going to be, unfortunately, the deer that we have here appears to be one of those genotypes that's not going to be as resistant.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So and it makes sense that it's higher prevalence.
Yeah,
it started
in the
here.
genotype that is less resistant to it.
Right.
But there again, we're still doing a lot of that,
Sure.
looking to see, and time will tell. It may be 15, 20 years before the whole picture's painted of that kind of work. But the same thing with elk. We're looking at we've got an elk genome project going on right now, and so we're looking at the same thing with elk, comparing CWD results to the genotype, and then you can also the lab can tell what strain of prion. So they've got different strains of prion throughout the United States that looks different than other prions, and so they can kind of say, okay, this is more consistent with like the Colorado strain or the Wisconsin strain.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
so some of that work going on to try to figure out, and I don't know if we'll ever know the origin of where it came from, but they're trying to figure out, even in the deers, okay, this CWD looks more consistent to other parts of the state where they already have that data. And so again, down the road, we'll probably, it'll be a little bit clearer as to where it came from.
Yeah. Yeah. For anyone who's listening and doesn't know what a prion is or what a prion disease is and how it transmits, well, you talked a little bit about transmission, but what is a prion and how is it different than other types of diseases that happen in cervids or whitetail, elk, moose, stuff like that?
Yeah, so prion is actually a naturally occurring protein in the body. Even us sitting here, we have prions, but the difference is when you get the variant form, and pretty much it causes cellular death in the brain and the neurological system. It's the way that it's conformed, so it actually changes conformation from a naturally occurring prion into the variant form, and then that causes cellular death. And so that essentially they'll get holes in their brain, where those parts of the brain have died. But where it's different is it's not a virus, it's not a bacteria. It's just it's a naturally occurring prion that for whatever reason has started to change in the body, and it causes that cellular death in the neurological system, which is a bad thing.
Yeah,
you know,
for
if you
sure.
start having
Oh, yeah.
necrosis, you know, in any of your neurological system, you know, that could be really bad.
Yeah.
So it's a protein death
It is a
or
protein
a protein
death.
attack.
Yes.
Wow,
That's crazy.
that is crazy.
I've got a question on kind of public perception of CWD, and I do want to know, is there any good news in all of this? Because I'm just sitting here getting kind of sad.
Like, this is scary.
But anytime I buy my, hunter fishing license and I'm, I guess hunting really, it's showing me my zone, right? And the dates and all of that. And then you got the little red square drawn around your certain counties that says CWD zone. And it's not legal to transport carcass from CWD zone out to a different county. Other than just that being regulation, is there any push to trying to educate the broad public as to the why and why it's so important to not start another hotspot in a county that doesn't have it? Or are y'all looking at it going, it's probably around and it's just a matter of time and science and us trying to figure it out? And that may not be a clear question, but the public face out, what is the response of Arkansas Game and Fish of trying to say, hey, don't do this, please? And how's that worked?
Yeah, so we've, as an agency in our communications division, of course, just like we're doing here, podcast, social media,
Mhm.
the biologist, we all kind of have the same message of, it's better to not allow it to be moved to another part of the state, because you definitely don't want this, to be spread. And anything that we can do to stop that is worthwhile. And so there's been a huge push through our communications division, just what you were talking about, of why we're asking people not to remove carcasses, and why we're being such a hard line on not allowing people to remove bones and carcass parts. It's got to be deboned meat, clean skull plates like on buck antlers, things like that, because we know that that's the part of the animal that can spread the disease. And that's kind of what we're tasked with as a wildlife agency, to try to prevent that from happening. And of course, it does kind of stink. I mean, I'm a deer hunter, and I have to abide by the same rules that other people have to abide by. And it kind of stinks to have to take those measures and to not be able to bait, certain parts of the year. But there again, I think we've shown that, by doing that, we can limit the spread, we can slow it down. And, at this point, anything we can do to keep it out of other parts of the state is worthwhile. So,
For sure.
just again, as an agency, we're really trying to push that message.
Yeah.
And of course, we get some help, from other states as well. We kind of all can utilize each other's information. And, we've used a lot of stuff out of Colorado to help spread our message as well, because they've been dealing with it for so much longer.
Mm-hmm.
We can kind of learn from when we first discovered it. There were 23 other states that had been positive before us, so we were able to kind of tap into their resources and their information, and what's worked and what's not worked as far as spreading the message, as far as regulations. And so it's helped us a lot in trying to make the right moves as far as stopping the spread of the disease.
Yeah. As far as I like the question about good news.
Yeah, where's the good news?
Because I'm sitting here like, oh crap, we know it's a huge deal, but this is not a fun conversation, right? Like, but something I just thought about as you were talking, and I'm asking, something I thought about is, well, if you're not allowed to bait year round now, and at the same time to prevent the spread, maybe now there's more of a reason than there has ever been to look into alternatives, which now you go back to like native grasses, focusing on burning, focusing on providing a natural and native habitat, as opposed to just dumping out a big old bucket of corn and hunting over that every year, and dumping that out year after year. Maybe that's given some impetus to, or some reason for a hunter who otherwise would hunt over corn, like to focus on native grasses, prairie grasses, and stuff like that. Has that been something that is positive? I'm totally grasping at straws here, just thinking through logically how I might think through this, but is that something? And then are there other good news insights that we have?
Yeah, so that's definitely a part of finding other ways to attract deer and to still have deer hunting. And you know, I hate to sound negative. It is a very important thing. And
Oh, it's not you sounding negative. It's just the facts.
We're just realizing the situation at hand.
Yeah, and it, you know, hate to be Debbie Downer, but you know, that's what we're faced with.
Sure.
And that's, you know, just kind of the situation that we're in. And yeah, it stinks for everyone.
Mhm.
And I don't want to sugarcoat it, you know, like, because I feel like we do that a lot. Is like, yeah, this is bad, but like, here's the bright side. If there's no bright side, like if we're like, no, we're kind of in the thick of it right now, and we're really grasping at solutions here, then like that's something that I think a lot of people want to know or need to know.
Yeah, so definitely we recommend, you know, not to bait year round, because we know that can spread the disease. It can be spread through the saliva, and then just the congregation of deer alone. You know, that daily interaction from different animals can you know, really be a point of spread. You know, having wildlife openings that can help, you know, still bring the deer in, but it can spread them out so they're not just, you know, putting their nose and their mouth in the same area, you know, as another deer, you know, day after day.
Right.
One thing I've told people is, if you are going to bait, you know, during that time when you can, spread it out. You know, make it more natural. Because if you think of, like, say, a white oak in the fall, you know, it's dropping acorns, so it's kind of the same thing.
Right.
You're still bringing deer in to a general area, and they're eating. But if you think about spreading the corn out, it would be a little bit more natural scenario. So that could help. You know, they're still going to be in close contact, but at least they're not, you know, every deer sticking their nose in the same pile. So that's one thing you can do. The food plots help spread them out. Definitely the burning, you know, can really encourage a lot of those native forbs and grasses and a lot of that native browse to help spread the deer out.
Does that burn the protein, the prion? Like, would that kill the prion and prevent spreading in that manner?
So that's actually some current research they're looking at right now. So it is possible that it does, but they don't know. So that's still kind of early on in that research. There's certain situations where they found, like the incinerators that I was talking about earlier, that there is potential for that ash to still have viable prions in it.
No way.
But then there's some new research that shows that, like, prescribed burning it may not burn it up 100%, but it may start that degradation process to where, you know, instead of being in the environment for, you know, long term, it may help degrade it quicker. And so that's something that we're looking at. I know that there's other states that are doing some, you know, some burning, but it's kind of difficult to do that research because they're having to do that in a lab situation.
Right. Yeah.
It's very difficult because of the control of that, you know, that project to do it out in the wild. There's so many factors that could play into that they almost have to do it in a lab situation to know 100% that, you know, that fire is going to kill the prion. You know, because there could always be, you know, more prions being added back in a natural situation, even if it is burning some of them.
Yeah,
it's hard for them to know. So that's kind of a difficult one, but there is research going on right now that's looking at that specific thing, which that'd be really cool if it worked.
It would be. Well, I mean, you think about some of the timing of this in historical burn regimes, and we've talked with Ryan Diener from Quail Forever. He came on, and that was kind of our first introduction to prescribed burning and the benefits of it, at least for me and Kyle here. But just the timing of white man introduction, then you had World War II, where mechanized farm equipment it allowed people to change their landscape and introduce non-native grasses and not have to burn to control their fields and their farms and stuff like that. And then you saw the quail start disappearing in the 60s into the 80s and up until to now, kind of in the Southeast. Like, I'm just kind of seeing all this. I'm just curious if you know, with your background as a burn manager and kind of working on the field, do you think there's some kind of credit or something to that there? And I know it's totally just your personal experience, not as a professional or
I mean, it doesn't appear. And again, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be something that could be, you know, used in the future, but it seems like it doesn't really affect prevalence rates in the deer and the elk that we're sampling. In those areas where we have a lot of burning going on, it appears to be just as bad. But you know, those areas, it may be that deer are coming in and out, or the elk are moving in and out of those areas you may have some that are coming in from areas that's not burned. So I think on a large scale it may work.
Yeah.
But like here, we have such small burn units because most private landowners aren't burning.
Right.
And so the home ranges of the deer and the elk are much larger than what our burn units are. So it's
Mhm.
difficult for us to say at this point. I haven't seen anything that appears to be affecting that. But there again, we talked about just a minute ago about if you don't have that in a lab situation to where you could definitively say, it's difficult to
say.
to really know.
Okay.
Some correlating problems, but not some correlation, but not causation.
Yeah,
for sure. Like
it's
correlating
not
things
proven.
happening, but not burning is leading to CWD, or burning is going to lead to eradication of CWD. That kind of deal.
It seems like in theory it should work.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think
I'm here for it.
I'm
fire
here for it.
fire. You would think because if it's just a protein, right? That's just like a piece of meat. I mean, if
Mhm.
you throw a piece of meat in a fire, of course it's going to burn up and it's going to degrade a lot quicker. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I think of it. Is it seems like it would work.
Right.
I mean, these pre-arms aren't like made of titanium or
Yeah.
something that's, even though they'll stay in the environment for long periods of time. I've got to think that the fire would somehow degrade it in a quicker manner.
Yeah.
It's not like a carbon half-life of
Yes.
like millions of years or whatever it is.
Well, and you have to think, just zooming way out, like prions are not new, right? Like prions have been on Earth since Earth began and Earth was created. So, why all of a sudden is this something? And I don't know if all of a sudden is the right word, but it just if we're seeing this prevalence so much more in the last 2 decades, 3-4 decades, like why now? And I don't know. It's just a question, but
Don't know.
it is interesting. There's some correlation, maybe.
So that's the CWD chapter. Should we talk elk hunting?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Let's move on to something positive.
Something positive, yeah. So want to get people excited about the elk, and of course it's not all doom and gloom because they are here, and there are actually a lot of healthy elk that don't have CWD, based on your research. Correct? Ask
Yes.
the question.
Correct.
So well, I did before we go straight to elk hunting. I wanted to ask just future of the elk herd. Has there been any thought to like, okay, so if we have a population of about 400, 420, you talked about nuisance problems and them expanding outside of this kind of home range that we have. Is there any appetite for just kind of like letting them go further out into the state, and would it be feasible for them to survive, or do you think there would just be too much negative public perception or not feasible for that to even occur?
As far as habitat's concerned, it would definitely be feasible. They would survive in other parts of the state, but I think, again, back to CWD, it's kind of our limiting factor.
Okay.
At this point, we have our core elk zone, and that's the 5-county zone where we have our public hunt, and then we have a statewide zone that encompasses everything else in the state. And so we've kind of drawn that line where if an elk gets outside of the core zone, it's fair game for a deer hunter. So
Gotcha.
You've probably seen, like the statewide zone
Mhm.
that you can utilize a deer tag to harvest an elk without having a permit outside of the core zone. So we've kind of established at this point that the core zone is where we want our elk to be.
Gotcha.
And if they get outside of that, the population's probably not going to increase significantly just for the fact that we allow open season on them pretty much.
Yeah, definitely.
Down the road as CWD, progresses and gets to other parts of the state, is it possible? Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That'll probably be long after, my time.
Mhm,
But at
yeah.
this point, that's kind of the stance the commission has taken, is that we kind of have elk where we want them.
Got it. That makes
And that's multi factor too, not just CWD, but again, just like we were talking about the Washita's earlier.
Mhm.
We know that the elk would survive in the Washita's, but we learned from this reintroduction that, you cause other issues with nuisance issues,
Mhm.
potential ecological issues, because we haven't done an environmental assessment down there to see, okay, if we released a bunch of elk, what would it do to the environment?
Yeah.
And so that would have to be done. Anyways, it's just something that I think at this point that the elk are kind of where
Yeah.
they're going to be.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Now we can move on from
Yeah, we know where they are. Where do we hunt them?
CWD. So hunting them. How do you let's talk through the application process, how it works. How does one go about getting a tag? You talked a little bit about Elk Fest and its drawn there, but today, how does it work?
So the month of May is when we have our application process. You just go onto the website where you purchase your license, and we have a special permits tab, which that'll be for deer, turkey, elk, alligator, any of our special permits that we offer. And so the month of May is when you do that, and you just pretty much go in there. You pay $5, and you put your name in the hat, and then of course, just like we talked about earlier, you have your name put into a squirrel cage at Elk Fest. And we draw out, we set a quota each year, and we'll draw out that many names, and, we'll let the hunters know. We also have, at Elk Fest, we have 3 permits that are on site. So you have to come to Elk Fest to sign up, and you have to be present to win. And again, that kind of helps draw people to Jasper
Sure.
and for the local economy. It helps to bring Elk Fest up a little bit as far as the attendance. We have a lot of people that show up. This year we had over 600 people that showed up to draw one of those 3 tags. So again, that's kind of a big deal for Elk Fest, is to come and to see us draw those names out of the squirrel cage.
You said that's in June.
That's the last weekend.
Last week of June.
Yeah, you're kind of coming straight off of that. We were emailing back originally, and you were like, hit me up after Elk Fest. I'm pretty busy right now.
Yeah, exactly. We just had elk hunt orientation a few weeks ago, and I got all the permits printed out and shipped out to the hunters, and of course sending out maps and elk hunt information.
So what does that look like, the orientation?
Yeah, so used to we had it in person.
Okay.
And of course, COVID years, kind of everybody's virtual these days.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot easier because people don't have to spend a whole day to come to Jasper and burn that gas and spend the money traveling, when we can do it face-to-face on the computer. So it works out pretty good.
Yeah.
Because we can still have that interaction, but, they don't have to have a huge burden on them. Some people still, want to come up here.
Yeah.
It gives them another day to possibly go scout a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely,
Find
man.
access points, at least kind of learn your zone.
Yeah.
The day I draw a tag, I'll be here in person.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think so.
But yeah, during the orientation, I have a presentation I go through, telling about the rules and the regs and kind of give them pointers on where to look and things like that. So it really kind of points them in the right direction as to get started elk hunting in Arkansas. We have 4 different zones that they can be drawn for. And, some of the zones are a little bit better than others, and we issue a few more permits in those zones. A couple of our zones, don't have near as many elk.
Okay.
But, utilizing the Buffalo River maps that they provide, I'll give them all that stuff, and it gives them a place to start. Answering lots of questions, by email and text, lots of phone conversations with hunters, because they're all really excited when they draw
Sure.
a
Yeah.
tag. And that's probably one of the best parts of my job, is interacting with those hunters, being able to see them, out in the field, and especially after they've harvested an elk. That's one of the best parts of the job. Is,
They're on cloud 9.
is being there when they've killed their first elk, in Arkansas especially, and the youth hunters that we've had over the years. That's just really, really cool to be part of that opportunity for them. And, I get to see a lot of trophy elk. Who wouldn't want to be,
That's
part
awesome.
of that? And it's really fun. That's probably the best part of my job is the whole hunt, process that, from the time I call these people to tell them that they've drawn a tag, to doing the orientation, to actually seeing them get to harvest one in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool time.
Yeah, man, that is cool.
So they kick off with just general archery season.
Most of the elk hunt is any method.
Okay.
So they can use rifle,
Okay.
muzzleloader, shotgun, archery. So it's depending on what they want to do. Most hunters are going to bring a rifle.
Yeah.
Right.
I've had a few over the years that they'll carry a bow the first few days, and then by about day 3, they're getting the rifle
They're
out
like,
of the case.
I can't get close enough.
Yeah, exactly. So it can be tough. And there's been a few people that have been successful with archery.
Yeah.
And that's really, really neat that they can do that. They've stuck with it. But most of the people, they just want to go out there and get one on the ground. And
I mean, you get one shot you finally get the tag. You're like, I want to get it done.
yeah, you've got 5 days.
Yeah.
So you got to make it happen. And it's usually they'll bring, 300 mag or 7 mag or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, a big, like something you'd see out west that
Sure.
people take.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a really cool time. And, you know, right after the hunt's over, that's when we kind of lead into the aerial survey time, start ramping up for that.
Okay.
So again, that's another really interesting time for me. Get to ride in a helicopter
That's
for,
cool.
for several days
Yeah.
and go fly around and count the elk. And
How do you know that you don't count the same elk twice?
so we have different zones set up.
Okay.
You know, we can only fly a couple of hours each morning because once the sun's up, they have a tendency to hit the timbered areas. So they get a lot more difficult to count when they're in the woods. The time of the year that we count them, you know, in February, they're usually in the fields, you know, first thing in the morning. So we'll go right at daylight. You know, that pilot comes out of Springdale, he'll come and he'll land, he'll pick me up, and we'll be flying over elk, you know, when it's still, you know, first light.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll fly, like, say, here in the Boxley area. We know that this herd doesn't necessarily interact with some of the herds downriver,
Okay.
or at least within a few day period.
Mm.
So what we'll do is we'll fly this zone twice back to back. And then we kind of work our way downriver. But we try to hit that in a very short period of time where we know, you know, there's going to be certain areas where we have to account for elk moving back and forth between zones. Typically, that's down more on the lower end, like around Richland Valley and in Searcy County, you know, where we have a lot of elk that are moving. But like here, this herd's kind of isolated from the rest of it. So it's
Okay.
pretty easy.
Okay.
We can fly this couple days, get a good count on it, and then we can move on and feel confident that, you know, that we're not going to have any elk moving in or out.
Yeah.
And so again, the weather plays a big part of that. We have lots of wind and fog and you know, kind of bad weather that time of year. But the more days that we can have that's back to back, it really helps our survey. And so we'll look at that, you know, the forecast and say, okay, we've got a 5-day period here where it looks like it's going to be good. So we'll try to target those areas and get a lot of it knocked out at a local level so that we can move on to that next group. So I think we've got a pretty good idea of, and that's why we say we have a minimum count. You
Right.
know, we know we're probably missing some. You know, there's going to be little pockets of elk here and there that we just can't fly everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as far as looking at the trends over time, we can look at, say, Boxley. You know, we can have trend data that says that the population's up or down and kind of how it's trending over time. And that allows us to know if the overall population is up, then we can issue a few more permits. And like the situation we're in now, we've been pretty aggressive on our hunt for the past few years. So it's time to back off a little bit. And we've seen that in our population survey that we're down quite a bit, you know, from, say, 2016.
What's the biggest elk that's been harvested at Arkansas?
Like inch-wise of antler? This year, I think we had, that I know of, and of course, I haven't seen them all, and not everyone gets their elk measured. You know, some people just don't really care how many inches. It's a trophy either way. But this past year, a guy harvested one. It was at the Big Buck Classic, and it scored in the upper 370s as a gross score.
That's amazing.
And it netted like 357.
That's amazing.
So to my knowledge, he killed one of the largest elk that I know of.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Rocky Mountain elk. And I imagine they don't get much bigger in Colorado.
No, we've had a few that we've seen that we thought, you know, this is during the survey. And of course, you're looking at it from the air, but just kind of estimating. I mean, we've had a couple that go close to 400 inches.
Wow.
But as far as the harvested elk, that 378 on a gross score, that's about as big as I've seen.
That is so cool.
That's crazy. When it comes to, so putting some pieces together here, if you draw the tag, and you guys are kind of tracking like where the herds are at, and you kind of know where herds are in the different regions that you have, then you have the orientation. Sounds like you guide the hunters quite a bit on like, if you want to have success, here's some recommendations, here's access. Is that kind of is that your intention to like have people see a high percentage of success in harvesting?
So we do guide them somewhat. We provide them quite a bit of information, but I don't think that we necessarily, we don't spoon feed them,
Yeah.
Where to go. We don't say, go to this field and you'll kill an elk.
Okay.
So there's still a lot of scouting, and there's a lot of opportunity for them to take it upon themselves to go find the elk.
Right.
So in general, we have about a 60% harvest success rate
Okay.
on all the permits.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit more than, 1 out of 2.
And so last year you had how many permits?
So last
Given
year
out?
there was 21 on public land and then 35 on private land.
Okay. And the private land permits are what they sound like. You have to own land, or you don't have to own land, but you have to know somebody who owns land.
Yeah, so you just have to have access, with somebody that has elk on their property that will allow you, the opportunity to come on their property.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like deer hunting. I
Yeah.
mean, if you know somebody that has elk and the season's still open, the quota hasn't been filled, because it's much like the bear hunt where you have to call in each evening to see if the quota has been reached. So we'll set an overall number that we want taken out. Once that's hit, regardless of when it is in the season, then it closes.
So you don't have to draw a private landowner tag. You just have to have access and check the quota before you go.
Correct.
Ah.
Anybody, so you can just go on the website where you buy your license, and you
Yeah.
can purchase a PLE, private land elk tag, for $5 on top of your other hunting license.
Gotcha.
And you can go hunt. You just have to abide by that quota.
Yeah.
And you have to have someone that has elk on their property that'll allow you access.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay. I didn't know that.
Do you see elk going as far north as Kingston, Huntsville, all that in there? They pretty much trend. Would that be east?
Yeah, so most of our elk herd is going to be east of there, but we've definitely had elk on the Kings River around Kingston.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some that's went up like around Berryville, Green Forest area,
Wow.
Really?
in the past. I wouldn't say that's the norm.
Sure.
A lot of them stay on that Buffalo River corridor.
Mhm.
It's so attractive to them that
Mhm.
a lot of them just don't leave. But we do have a tendency for some to every now and again that will range out there. But I would say at this point, from the last few years, they're kind of moving east. They're going downriver. Searcy County seems to be pretty attractive to them.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely historically, in this area here and west of here, and even kind of northwest, they've moved that way
Yeah.
at times.
So get up that
So
way.
if I go buy some property in Searcy, and there's elk on it, and I just call every day, and if the quota's not filled, I can hunt that elk.
Correct.
Cool.
Well, I know I'm buying property.
I was gonna start looking at Zillow.
We're gonna cut this one out of the podcast so not everybody goes and does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and everybody else.
Yeah,
I
true.
think the property values in Searcy County with elk have significantly went up.
Oh,
That's no
I'm-
joke.
I'm
I
sure.
was about
There's
to
been
say.
a lot of people that
It's like having a trophy stretch on the white,
yes,
I imagine.
like Bear Creek, just north of kind of west of Marshall, north on 65 there. That's been a pretty good hot spot
Yeah.
over the past, say, 8 to 10 years.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that land, where the elk have historically been is through the roof.
Yeah. I believe it.
I mean, you're talking, 10, 15,000 an acre,
Yeah. Sheesh.
even for large tracts.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, where,
Some pricey stuff.
back in the day, you could get that stuff for 1,800.
Yeah.
Now it's,
It's just a deer camp.
Yep.
Now, yeah. It makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I don't think anyone would not understand the value behind that if they own that property.
Yeah.
Well, Wes, we've asked you a lot of questions. We kind of jumped all over the place here towards the end. I'll wrap it up with some softballs here for you. One, thank you for what you do, and it's cool for you to share this what you know and the knowledge and experience that you've gained over the years with us. We really appreciate that, and with our audience. But I just wanted to ask kind of a softball, what is it about elk and this particular job that you love? You said you've been doing it for 12 years. That's a long time to kind of do the same job. Sounds like you trickle in some other stuff, but what is it about this area or the elk that keeps you, up every day, doing it day after day, trying to learn about the elk?
like I said earlier, I was raised not far from here, and I spent my childhood, pretty much doing the same things, or I would like to have been doing the same things that I'm doing now. A lot of the stuff that I do for work, I would volunteer to do, even if he didn't pay me.
Yeah.
Go out and light fires and go check dead elk and fly helicopter surveys and go in bear dens.
Hopefully your boss isn't listening.
Yeah,
Like,
but yeah.
we don't need to pay him anymore.
But I mean, if you think about it, it's just in my opinion, it's a dream job to be able to be outdoors. It keeps me healthy. I'm not just sitting at a desk every day, drinking Dr. Peppers and eating donuts. And so that's a big part of it is staying active and just being outdoors, man. I love it. And I'm able to be close to my family. So it's just been a blessing for me to be able to be in this position, and I just really enjoy every day.
Yeah. What would be kind of a message you'd want to leave with people who are learning about elk for the first time on this episode, or just, maybe they've known about them, but, they've seen them, but they don't really know anything about them, and maybe they've never visited them? What would be something you'd say to people?
Yeah, so first thing I'd say is if you're interested in seeing them, come down here to Boxley Valley, which is where our elk viewing area is. You can also come to the Ponca Nature Center, which is where we're sitting right now. Lots of cool stuff to look at as far as the mounts and the different information. So you can learn a lot by coming to this facility about elk in Arkansas. You can actually go right down the road and you can see some. The best time to come here would be in the fall, like, first couple weeks of October is the peak of the rut. That's when you're going to see a lot of the bulls chasing the cows and gathering in their harem, a lot of the bugling activity, and maybe even fighting. Two bulls locked together with antlers is a sight to see. It really is. I mean, just hearing that and seeing how strong these animals are, and man, they're putting everything into it whenever they're fighting. So that's really cool to see that. But I would just say if you're interested in elk, just come and see it for yourself. What it's all about. And it's a great resource for the state, and I would encourage people to come in to utilize that, because it's pretty unique. One other thing about elk in Arkansas is, I believe I'm correct on saying this, that this is the only state in the U.S. where we have public land elk hunting and alligator hunting.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And so it's, I think Arkansas is just really unique, and it's kind of a hidden gem that a lot of people think Arkansas, and they might not think that this is probably one of the most beautiful places in at least in the East. The Ozarks is very unique. Some of the land features that we have here, and just the wildlife that we provide here. It's a pretty unique place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's why we started the podcast, and we'd love to talk about it, is exactly like what you just said. The variety, the opportunities to get outside and chase a variety of different outdoor pursuits, whether it be elk, bear, hiking, floating, fishing, what have you. There's just, I could not agree with you more. It is an awesome place. Well, Wes, we appreciate your time. Thank you for setting it up for us to meet here. What a cool place, cool backdrop. I've never recorded a podcast in front of a full body mount elk and a black bear off to behind me and a couple of turkeys.
Yeah, you got a tom turkey.
We got all kinds of stuff around us, so we really appreciate your time, Wes.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all coming and sharing this opportunity for this facility, and I'm glad y'all got to see some elk on your way in.